I am not a historian, but neither are you. So, how about we, the people, learn this stuff together? Welcome to US 101. And if for some reason you decide not to watch this episode, then 15-yard penalty, unnecessary laziness. You guys, fall is my favorite time of year, okay? The air gets a little cooler, the weather gets a little bit crisper, apple cider donuts, and I can relentlessly make fun of anyone that orders pumpkin spice anything. Seriously, if you are one of those people, you go straight to hell. But more importantly, guys, my favorite sport is back in full swing. Football is back in all of its violent glory. And yes, sure, the NFL is suffering from a slight image problem these days, what with some players brutally beating up women and still being allowed to play, to the league not knowing how to handle some players that won't stand for the national anthem, to the poor handling of concussions when it comes to players, to letting the New England Patriots cheat time and time again. But hey, football is back. I have my reason to drink on Sunday mornings while rooting for my Chicago Bears. But how did football, which is the closest thing that we have to the gladiator games of ancient Rome as far as I'm concerned, even get its start here in the good old US of A? For that story, guys, we have to travel all the way back to 1869 and visit the campus of my alma mater, Rutgers University. Now, the first thing you have to remember before we get into the story, guys, is that football essentially stems from the game known as rugby. Now, rugby, in case you guys don't know, is a game that features players running down the field with a ball that they cannot pass forward. Furthermore, in rugby, nobody wears any sort of padding, nobody wears any helmets, and yet they are dishing and or taking tremendous hits. I'm not really too familiar with the sport of rugby, but if you guys have ever seen a rugby game and the hits that they... watch the All Blacks from New Zealand. Those guys are ferocious. Well, the rules of the first game of football were derived from rugby rules and soccer rules. And on November 6, 1869, students from Rutgers University and Princeton University met in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and played a game of football on a field where today the College Ave Gymnasium on the main campus of Rutgers stands. The two teams each consisted of 25 players, and the way that you scored in this game of football was to kick the ball into the opposing team's goal. Except the thing is, the only way that you could move the ball forward is you could kick the ball forward. You couldn't run with it, you couldn't hold it, you couldn't throw it forward, yet you could tackle the shit out of your opponent. And by the end of the game, guys, Rutgers ended up beating Princeton 6-4, which gave RU bragging rights for life because the school could now claim that they were the official birthplace of football in the United States. Hoorah. Now, you might think that this early version of football, which is basically soccer with tackling, complete with violence and injuries, would be a one-time thing. But you have to remember something. We are the United States of America, and we love us some gratuitous violence. Of course, more football followed that game. More schools, including Yale and Columbia, joined RU and Princeton in playing the game. And in fact, in 1873, members from those schools would meet in New York City to put down on paper the very first official rules of intercollegiate football in the United States. However, there was one school that was playing football but didn't want anything to do with this meeting because they wanted to play by a different set of rules, and that school was Harvard. See, Harvard preferred playing football using a set of rules that were used by a Montreal school called McGill University, which featured something called the try, which is equivalent to a touchdown, basically. Additionally, in this version of the game, you could actually pick up the ball and run forward with it to try to score. And of course, there was tackling in the game. There has to be tackling in the game. These rules in this version of the game started gaining more ground because a lot more people enjoyed seeing this version of American football. And eventually, Harvard would go on to challenge Yale to a game of football, and they asked that they would use these rules. Yale didn't fully agree to all the rules. Instead, they brought their own rules to the table. Harvard brought their own rules to the table. They compromised on the rules. They played the game, and in the end, Harvard beat Yale 4-0 in front of a group of 2,000 spectators. And one of the spectators of that Harvard-Yale game was a man by the name of Walter Camp, who following that game would later go on to enroll at Yale. He would join the football team. He would become one of the captains of the football team, and then later would become known by a different title, the father of modern football. Because on November 23rd, 1876, Camp, along with other students from schools like Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, Yale, they would all meet up at a place called the Massasoit House in Springfield, Massachusetts to put down the new rules for football. And Camp would be the one to introduce rules to the game to make it a lot less sloppy. For example, he introduced the idea of the line of scrimmage. If you don't know what the line of scrimmage is, that's basically where the ball will be placed on the field following the previous play. That's where the players have to set up for the next play. He also suggested rules like only 11 players per team, the idea of down and distance play, in other words, first down, second down, third down, fourth down, and the idea of the center snapping the ball back to the quarterback. He would also help to establish how many points certain things were worth in football. So at the time, a touchdown, he decided, would be worth 4 points, a safety would be worth 2 points, and a field goal would be worth 5 points. Now, following the making of these new rules, even more schools got involved in playing football. More schools wanted to create their own teams and get involved in the competition. And for a long while, football was only played on the college level. But as the game started to gain more notoriety among American citizens and more Americans started going out to watch football games, local athletic clubs wanted to get in on the action as well. In 1892, two Pittsburgh athletic clubs, the Allegheny Athletic Association and the Pittsburgh Athletic Club, were these just intense rivals that when they would play, it was just brutal football. Now, when you have a rival, what do you try to do? You always try to find that edge that you can have on that rival, that one way that you can always beat them. And that's exactly what Allegheny did to the Pittsburgh Athletic Club. What they did is they found Yale All-American William Pudge Heffelfinger, and they signed him to a contract and paid him $500 to play on their team for one game against the PAC. Now, because of that signing, Allegheny, when they would play Pittsburgh, would go on to beat them 4-0. And because of that payment, Heffelfinger was the first person in the United States of America to be paid to play football. Now, in 1893, the Pittsburgh Athletic Club would take this idea one step further and sign a player to an entire season, thus marking the very first time that a pro football contract was introduced to the game. And then, in 1895, the first all-professional game was played between two athletic clubs, the Latrobe Athletic Association and the Jeannette Athletic Club. And then, in 1899, a team was formed on the south side of Chicago called the Morgan Athletic Club. But they would not be known by that name for very long. Later on, they would be called the Normals, then they would change their name to the Racine Cardinals, then the Chicago Cardinals, then the St. Louis Cardinals, then the Phoenix Cardinals, see where I'm going with this? And then in 1994, the Arizona Cardinals, thus making the Cardinals the oldest continuing team in professional football. You know something? Speaking of professional football, what about the NFL? Where did the National Football League come from? Where was this powerhouse league birthed? The answer? Inside of a car dealership in Canton, Ohio in 1920. In 1920, a group of team owners came together and formed the American Professional Football Conference, which was later changed to the American Professional Football Association, and that association featured teams that you all know and love, man. Guys like the Dayton Triangles, the Muncie Flyers, the Akron Pros, and the Decatur Staleys. But eventually, the American Professional Football Association, the owners, they didn't really like that name. It was too long, too wordy, so they decided to shorten it and change it to the National Football League, or the NFL. And by 1921, even more teams joined the league. I think about 21 or 22 teams were in the league around this time. Now, as this fledgling league was starting to grow, teams would eventually just kind of fall off because they couldn't, they couldn't field a roster, they couldn't complete their games, they eventually would go away. The Dayton Triangles, the Akron Pros, all these teams would kind of fade into the background, including a team, by the way, known as the Decatur Staleys. The Decatur Staleys were owned by a guy named A.E. Staley, and eventually he would sell the team to one of the players/coaches of the team named George S. Halas, who would eventually take the Decatur Staleys to the city of Chicago and change their name to the Chicago Bears. And then later in 1933, the first ever NFL championship game was played between the Chicago Bears and the New York Giants, and the Bears would win 9-0, thus making them the very first champs in NFL history. And that is where I'm going to end this story, guys, with the Bears on a high note. I know I'm supposed to be impartial if I'm trying to be a historian, but whatever. My show, my team, I'll end it however I damn well please. But regardless, guys, now you know the story. Now you know how football made its way into American culture. And now I would like to pose a question to you guys, man. In the comment section down below, first off, let me know if you're a football fan, and if you are, who's your team? And that is it, my fellow fans of the gridiron. Thank you guys so much much for hanging out with me and for checking out this episode. And for those of you that have subscribed to the channel, thank you guys so much for doing so. And thanks to all of you that have liked the videos, shared them, and left comments in the comment section. Guys, I love having a dialogue and discussion with you guys. That is my favorite part of doing this whole thing. As always, guys, you can follow US 101 on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. All those links down below in the description box. Guys, thank you again for watching. I am all done, and I've got to go check my fantasy scores because I think, if all goes well, I'm going to beat my kid brother in fantasy this week. So let's end it on singing the fight song. Woo! Bear down, Chicago Bears!